All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to this month's IDMS Community webcast covering REST API stuff that the team is working on. Before I hand you off to Dave and Vamshi, there's a couple of things I need to cover. If you have questions along the way, please use the questions box along the right-hand side of your screen to post those. I will then read them out loud so that they are a part of the recording, which leads me into the recording part. We are recording today's session. That's why your lines are all muted. Replay will be available either later today or tomorrow morning out in the IDMS community. So look for it out there. You can point colleagues out there, or if you want to watch them or part of it again. I'm also hoping that, that I can convince Dave to share his presentation so I can post that as well. And then the last thing for me is we want to make sure that these sessions are valuable. So a short survey is going to pop up at the end of the webcast. If you could stick around and give us an extra minute just to give us some feedback, I know everyone would love it. All right, thanks very much, and take it away, Dave.
Thanks, Len. Hi, everybody. And as you can see, normally we would Sheila, our offering manager, would be presenting this, but she's had the misfortune of spending the evening in an unscheduled overnight stay at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. So she asked me to kind of kick this off. But with me today is Vamshi Paramalu Yalamanchili, and he is one of our software engineers who's been working on our business REST API, and he'll be showing an actual use case of it.
Did we lose your audio, Dave? I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was attempting to advance the slide and I must have muted myself.
That's all good. Very
easy to click the wrong button on the mouse. Anyway, okay, so as always, when we present, things that we're working on, these are forward-looking, statements, and we have to present this disclaimer that essentially says this is our plans now, but they're subject to change at any time. So I keep muting myself when I try to advance the slides. The space bar is not doing what I expect. So sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so what we'll cover today, we'll talk a little bit of background about APIs and how we distinguish between what we call systems versus business APIs, and a very quick review of sort of the overall strategy of what we've been doing. And then we'll talk about how an initiative we're working on to provide a tool that can be used to create business APIs automatically. And then Vamshi will show an example, a real world use case of building a browser-based application that uses an API that we created. And then Sheila had some announcements here, so we'll cover those. And I believe we have a couple of polls. Is that right, Len? That we'll have.
Yes, we have two polls that we have two polls that we'll do throughout the session.
Sure, and of course we'll have QA, and you can certainly they can post questions in the chat while we're talking, and at the end we can enable them, right? Is that
yeah? So if you have any questions, please put them in the questions box, not in the chat. Put in the questions box, and then I'll go ahead and read those at the end.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, so without further ado, we'll talk a little bit about why we're so focused on APIs and the distinction. And maybe some of you have seen this slide before. It's one that we didn't create it in the IDMS team. I think this originally might have even come from somebody at IBM with but it's been used within Broadcom and even CA before that around SOE. And the idea here is that the way almost everything that we see, everything we see on the web, on the internet, is really ultimately based on APIs. We see nice user interfaces, like the user interface that we're using to view this webinar. And these are typically things that are implemented in, typically if they're in browsers, they're usually, language called JavaScript, but there's other some other technologies as well that are really all around providing what we see on the screen. But under the covers behind that, there's all kinds of stuff that's going on. And there's generally a very clean separation between the back-end processing and what we see. And that clean separation is exposed through APIs. And the nice thing about these APIs is that they're based typically on the web protocols, HTTP protocols, which means that they're language and platform independent. So you can write an application program in Java or C, or a browser-based program in JavaScript, or a Python program, or any of the many application implementation languages, and they all have the same way. As long as they can invoke a REST API, they can execute that service. And if we contrast this with the way we used to do client-server things, years ago, every service we wanted had its own proprietary interface, and we had to have interfaces for all the different languages, and it really became quite a spider web of connectivity. By building APIs, we have a common way that services can be exposed, and for all services and all applications. Okay, given that, that's why we're building APIs in general, so that we can expose the capabilities of our Broadcom products and in this new standard way. But the next thing to think about is that we really think about two types of APIs. We have system APIs, and these are about managing our Broadcom products, managing the products that manage your environment. And this is what most of the work that we've done within Broadcom mainframe on APIs is around providing APIs that are managing the system. This makes a lot of sense for tools like Top Secret or Endeavor, where these are really system-oriented tools. Well, we've built a set of those APIs for IDMS as well, that we plan to use in further modernization efforts. But something that's kind of unique about especially about databases and transaction servers, like on the left-hand side where you can see CICS and IMS and DB2 and IDMS and DCOM really means Datacom. Business APIs are kind of different. Those are APIs that expose customer application processes through the same exact set of technologies that then can then be used to build more modern user interfaces on existing systems, or even completely new applications that leverage the data that and business logic that has already been implemented in these application systems. So that's why there's kind of an arrow there that flows between the two. So that's just a little bit of setting the stage of sort of our overall goal. And this is not just unique to IDMS. This is over Broadcom mainframe as a whole. Okay. Well, here's just a set. The way we think about the way we do things, we think about user personas and use cases, and then solutions to satisfy those use cases. So this is the classic product management way you think about building capabilities of software, or for that matter, anything that you build. So the user personas that we have are obviously DBAs, typical administrators, or that's for all the Broadcom products we have administrative personas. But for the databases, we have developers, experienced developers and next generation developers. But there's also sort of another set of personas that are sort of front end developers, if you will, or developers of the APIs that sit between them. So these various personas have set of use cases. DBAs are typically they're keeping the system running. They want to make sure that it's running optimally, and that so they want to optimize their operations. But a big use case that we see for DBAs, and this is especially for, it says next generation DBAs, but it could be DBAs that are perhaps coming from another database that are now being, tasked with supporting IDMS. And the use cases around that are really around simplifying database administration and automating processes. We all know IDMS is a complex product and it's complex to learn. So that's one of our goals to do that. Okay, so we have for the DBA personas, we have a couple of sets of solutions that we've been providing, and one is to provide APIs or CLIs, that's a call level interface, and that will support writing scripts to automate operations and providing capabilities that can be integrated into sort of new modern database front ends that would be more like what people are used to for other platforms, and also something where a common front end that could support all our Broadcom databases. That's another initiative that I think you'll be hearing more about in the coming months. We also there are certain use cases of monitoring performance. So we've been providing some APIs that can return performance monitoring data that can be used to develop user interfaces and dashboards. And we have some samples that we've shown about that as well. Okay, for developers, and here I'm kind of talking about developers of the mainframe applications, COBOL programmers, ads programmers that are sort of maintaining existing applications. Now, it may be true that there's not a lot of new development happening on IDMS COBOL applications, but these applications still need to be maintained. They still break. They still have, their insurance or financial regulations change, and the applications need to be maintained. So we're looking at ways that we can provide, ways to do more modern tools, especially for next generation developers that are familiar with those tools to maintain these applications. So in there, we're looking at things like APIs that would support more scripting for DevOps and continuous integration, continuous delivery, things like interfaces, support for things like Jenkins and things like that might facilitate that type of stuff, as well as integration into popular, integrated development environments. And then the last set of use cases here, which is pretty much, that's why it's in purple, the focus of today's session is to leverage the existing data and databases in new applications that would be based on web services and provide new front ends, whether these are just, a new, more attractive, easier to use interface to the existing application, or more or less a completely new application that leverages the data, for additional purposes. And so to that end, we're working on providing tools to create these business APIs. So let me make sure Okay, so one of the ways we talk about, things we might do is we talk about things like hill statements. Okay, and so we talk about a problem. In this case, users need to they need to do interfaces to transaction processing applications, and developers need to create these new applications. So a hill statement is a statement of something that that is sort of an outcome of that. So our hill statements for the business API is that an IDMS or Datacom, we're doing this for both databases, can easily create REST APIs that access their native data and business logic. And then also another hill statement is that the web developer, remember that was the other lower left persona, that they can discover and consume these REST APIs easily without having a lot of detailed knowledge of the underlying backend systems. So here's we did a case study a few years ago, or more, it was really a proof of concept. We worked with one of our very large customers where they had an existing very large IDMS network database, and their goal was to build a new set of browser-based or actually cloud-based applications that would allow them to retrieve, update, and otherwise manipulate the information in the network database. I believe it was a CICS-based application, and they really wanted a browser-based application. So the way we help them do that is, we used IDMS SQL and defined an SQL reference schema that makes the network database visible as 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 if they were SQL defined tables. And then the customer built two components that it shows here that they ran in the cloud. These things could be running in on premises. Some of these things could actually even run on your mainframe or run off the mainframe. So they built really kind of two pieces here. One was the application server that served up the web application, served up the JavaScript pages that, displayed forms and accepted data. And this front end would then invoke API requests to an API server that in their model, they would run that, in the cloud. And this API server was based on Spring Boot, and which is a sort of a API server development framework, and Tomcat, which is probably one of the most popular application servers available in the open source world. So what they built was a REST controller. What that really means is that is the thing that implements the API. And in a few minutes, I'll show you what examples, some APIs. And that REST controller then would respond to a HTTP API request and to do something. And the thing that it did was it used JDBC to access the network database using SQL. And they talked about an IDMS to POJO transformation. And what that really meant was, okay, you read the IDMS network records and turn those into plain old Java objects that the REST controller can now manipulate and combine or break up in whatever means they wanted to, and then the web application would see that as a JSON document. And so we'll take a look at how that might sort of work. So here we see an example of just from one of our databases samples where there's a payroll system with a payroll record that's defined by a COBOL copybook. Okay, and so what an API request might do is get one of those payroll records. So the way that might be invoked would be HTTP, just stands for the Hypertext Transport Protocol. It's the way everything on the web works. And it has methods, and those methods are things like get and put. Well, an HTTP GET request gets a resource from the internet somewhere. And in this case, we're saying, okay, we want a payroll record. And furthermore, that payroll record has a key of 90901. So that, front end, that when the GET request occurs, that data that is described by this copybook would be transformed into essentially the same data, but in a JSON document, and JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's like XML, but simpler. It's just basically name and value pairs that can be grouped together in a structure. In this case, it's a very simple structure of one level deep with, but as you can see, it's completely self-describing. Every attribute has a name and a human readable type. So the types can be numbers or strings, or I think dates might be another type. But the really key point here is that it's human readable, which means it's typically UTF-8, or more or less we think of it as ASCII. And that might seem inefficient, but we could compress this. But what's nice about this is it's universal. I mean, text is text is text, as long as you can convert, and it's always in the same format. Any platform can read that, and you don't have to worry about, it's self-describing. You don't have to have a you don't need that copybook on the front end because every field has its name there. And as long as you understand the meaning of the field names, you can understand the meaning of the data. Similarly, an HTTP put request could put the data back. Okay, so I think I'm going to have to pick up the pace. Okay, so given that all that background, we can talk about our proposed business API solution. It's a little bit more than a proposal. We actually have a working model of this that we're working on making available for validation relatively soon. So the idea here is that we would generate REST APIs from existing database definitions automatically, and that would expose, everything in your database: records, tables, system tables, procedures, table procedures. Everything that you've got that you can see through SQL could be exposed through a REST API. And our ultimate goal would be to provide, the create, retrieve, update, and delete operations to these resources. Our initial proof of concept is a generates retrieval API, so it supports the HTTP GET methods. But as customer demand or interest drives it, then our ultimate goal would be to provide, methods to update the database as well. And furthermore, I didn't really talk about it much here, but a big part of Broadcom Mainframe's API initiative is around this thing called Zoe. Zoe has an API mediation layer. What that really means is API gateway and it's very tightly integrated with the external security managers to make your APIs as secure as anything else you do on the mainframe. So I just almost muted myself accidentally again. Okay, so this is kind of what this might look like. Okay, remember our personas that we had an API developer and a web developer. I've kind of broken these out into two because they're kind of two different roles that may have two very different skill sets. Okay, the API developer is doesn't have to be an expert on IDMS, but at least they're somewhat familiar with it. They're going to be comfortable, recognizing what tables are in the database and what they're used for, and things like that. The web developer is more concerned with the user interface on the front end and maybe any external business processing. So what we built here is it's what we call a VS Code extension. VS Code is a very popular development environment today, and this consists of a component called a database. We call it a database explorer. Traditional explorer type of view or control that lets you discover the objects in your database. And the API developer would choose those objects, and it's kind of hard to read that. I've got some better examples later of sort of a JSON description of your data. And then it would then generate code. There's a bunch of that code. It generates Java class files that will actually implement the APIs. Those would be deployed in an API server that would be self-documenting, as it shows there with the payroll record API. And then the web developer could use that API to discover the APIs that represent the objects in the database, and could then retrieve those, build applications that retrieve those, the values of the data, and they're both sort of set to at either end. We've got JSON documents, and have that feed into a web application. So architecturally, this would look something like this. Here's sort of the overall architecture of how we've put these things together. Okay, on ZOS we have a database API server that we've already built. This is an example of really of a systems API. It is essentially exposing the same type of data that the JDBC metadata classes expose about our databases, which means anything you can see through SQL, you can see through this metadata API server, or you can see the descriptions of it. Okay, that VS Code extension that we have uses the metadata API to discover the databases. And then the developer can say, okay, so generate me some APIs. Those are then packaged into a a business API server application. And one of the things that we provide in addition to the VS Code extension is a set of common library classes to support this, as well as a basic sample Spring Boot project as a container for this. So it's very quick to create this. And finally, then they generate that REST client application that the web application developer would use to develop applications for the ultimate end user. So with that, now I'm going to get very brave and try to do a live demo. These are always exciting and fun to do, but we'll see. Okay, so this is an example of the API catalog. That's part of the Zoe API mediation layer. And as you can see, this is one of our LPARs. This is showing all the APIs that are accessible through this gateway on this LPAR, which is, I don't know, one of our internal development APIs. But you can see there's a lot of API services here. A big part of the value of this gateway is, number one, you can see everything in one place. They're self-documented. But another key point about using this gateway is that for security, because the security administrators only need to open up one TCP/IP port in order to do all these API services. And if you have a lot of separate servers, then you've got a lot of ports to open up. As developers, we might not think much about that, but administrators in most end user companies, opening up a TCP/IP port to the mainframe is a non-trivial exercise, I believe, that's very secured. So we take a look here. I'm just going to drill into one of these. Here's our SQL metadata service that I mentioned. And we have one for Datacom and IDMS. So we'll take a look at the IDMS one. And you can see this is called Swagger documentation. That's or Open API documentation, I think it's also called. And it shows the sets of endpoints that that we've implemented in our API. We can get a list of the data sources that we've defined here. And the nice thing here is, so if we look at this, we can see it's documenting, tells us any parameters, there aren't any, tells us the expected response and the like. There's other more complicated ones. Nice thing here is you can also try it out. So we click try it out. This is part of the, sort of what these APIs automatically provide. So this is not meant to replace an application, but it does give an application developer a way to see what APIs are out there and how can I call them? How should I code my application to call it? So we'll just, if I click execute, we can see that we've defined this metadata server can look at these different, in this case, these different data sources, and these data sources, essentially these correspond to the various CVs that we've made available through this metadata API. Okay, so another quick thing to look at here would be, let's see, we want to see, let's take a look. We want to see what tables are out there. Okay, so we'll take a look here, and we're going to look at, so we're going to connect to the one of those data sources we saw there, and we want to find all the tables that are in the demo EMPL schema, and we could filter if you want the ones that match, that match, start with EMP. So we'll try this one out, and I execute it. We can see, okay, so these are the tables that are defined in the database. These certainly could be SQL defined tables, or they could be network records that we've, that we've defined an SQL schema to point at. It really doesn't matter, it works both ways. Okay, so that's I just wanted to sort of give a feel for what our APIs look like, and also, a building block for the actual generator code. So if we take a look at this is Visual Studio Code, obviously, because that's what the screen says. And so this is some people consider this just a text editor, but it's very extensible. So it's sort of becoming a very lightweight development environment, maybe not quite as heavy as things like IntelliJ or Eclipse, but it's lightweight, so it's very popular, and it's very suited to front-end development as well. So we can see here's a sample project we provide with a build file that describes how to build it, and basically it's sort of a starting point, so you don't have to start from scratch. Oh, excuse me. And then there's, it has source code and some sample source code we provide. Okay, so the interesting thing down here, if we'll click open this where it says Database Explorer, this is kind of the gist of the extension. So if we look at the Explorer, we're going to look at this metadata API, the same thing we just looked at. So the extension makes all the same types of calls I just showed you, and we'll look at the sysdemo, data source, and then we can look at demo EMPL, and we can see these are all the tables. Let me make a little more room here. Let's get a little more geography there. Okay, we can see these are the tables in the demo EMPL database, or we can look at the views. Okay, or we can even look at procedures. Do we have any procedures? We do. Okay, so we can see the procedures. So if we look at the tables now, we can say, okay, here's an employee table. We can click on that and we can see the columns in the table or the indexes. Okay, and if you've got a calc key, we consider that to be an index. If you've got relationships between the records, we see the primary key, foreign keys, and we can see the primary foreign key relationships between these. Or if you're using virtual columns in IDMS, these would be the set relationships for a network database. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can say, okay, I want an API that will update this record. So if I just right click here and I click generate an API, and it went out and it retrieved all that information, all the columns and things, and the keys, and it built a set of Java classes here. We've got like 4 classes here. Okay, so if we look at, there's this employee Java. Okay, this represents the record. This is sort of the Java implementation of that would generate that JSON, JSON document like I showed earlier, and I'm not going to drill into these things here, but suffice it to say, it has a lot of these things with @ signs on it. These are called annotations. This is kind of like metadata that's embedded into Java programs, and it's really what provides all the power of this whole Spring Boot framework, where all I really have to do is define the fields and then some attributes, something like say JSON property. That means, okay, that'll turn into something in the JSON document called EmpID. Okay, so that's what that does. We have a similar type of thing just for the calc key. Okay, because calc, this was returned as a unique index, so we chose to create another model for the index. When I use the term model, model just describes the data. Then we have something called a controller class. This is all generated, and this is now usable now. You can just type in a build command and you'll have a running API without writing a single line of code here. Okay, so in this case, the controller is what actually defines those endpoints. If you remember, we saw a data sources endpoint and an employee endpoint. So we have an endpoint here called employee. Okay, we say employee, and we want to pass it the data source because we need to know what CV to connect to, and we want to know what employee. So that get mapping here, this just defines the endpoint that we just saw. When I looked at the Swagger documentation, and this is just all documentation stuff. All this add API stuff is what generates that documentation. And then, the final class that we generate is what we call the service class. And this is where the actual SQL statements, okay, that are used to query and ultimately update the database, along with things like where clauses. And then we can string these together, and we generate another class then that basically this is where we make the JDBC calls to get a connection and prepare a statement, and then execute the query and return it as a JSON document. So to go back to, let me make sure I get back to the right place. Okay, so now that we've generated that, we can now look at, where did I put it? Here it is, okay. Back to our API mediation layer. If we click on this tile here, we can see this, you can forget about this login thing. We're going to remove that, but you can see that these are the 3 endpoints that were created from the Java classes that I just showed you. We take a look at I'll look at this one here. This is the one we just looked at. So if I take a look at this, once
You want to
again, I
go
can
to
try it out.
IDMS side, dear, at the top. IDMS, sorry, not the datacom.
Am I on the wrong one? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's identical. Thanks, Vamsi. As you can see, it's identical, and hopefully it would have responded the same way. But I know this CV is up. Thank you, Vamsi, for avoiding me making having my demo not work. Okay, so we'll take a look here. We've got the employed table. This is the API that we just generated, and if I click on Get, again, I can try it out, and so we'll see some documentation here. It's okay, it requires a data source so we know what CV to go to. And in this case, since we want a single row, we need to know which row. So we're looking for the calc key 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the expected responses, but I can then, if I try it out and execute it, and we can see it actually retrieved this employee ID. Okay, so and it's the complete record as it's defined in the database. Okay, I don't want to do it, execute it, and then we generate a couple of endpoints. We have an endpoint to get all the keys. So if we did this one, again, this doesn't take as much input. If we execute this, we can see these are the calc keys for all the records in the database, and so you can see that. And we have another endpoint that we generated that can retrieve all the rows. Okay, and you have the option in the generator to say, I don't want all the rows, I want you to give me some query parameters. And so we try this one out, and we get all the rows. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do this for a 1,000,000 row database. That's why we provide the capability to define query parameters for it and the keys. So, that complete API was created without writing a single line of code. Just point and click, pick the tables, generate it, and then deployed it to the mainframe and set up some JCL to run it or create it as a started task. So with that, I think that's the end of my demo, and I want to leave a few minutes left for Vamsi to actually, let me get rid of this, get back to the presentation here, and I will, and now Vamsi will take over and show you an application that we built. It actually was built for Datacom, but it's using a Datacom system API that we generated using this generator technology as well. And it's a kind of a universal type of application. It's a health check application. Health checks apply to IDMS, and at some point we think it might be helpful to have something similar for IDMS. So Vamsi, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Can you make me presenter, Len?
I think, Len, do you want to do that? I'm not quite sure how to
Yeah,
do that.
I got it.
Got it.
Good. Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dave. This is Vamsi. I'm a software engineer at Broadcom. So far we have seen how to design, develop, and automatically generate these REST API endpoints without writing any single line of code, right? So once we have these endpoints, now what next, right? So now I will go through a use case to showcase how easily we can leverage these REST API endpoints in a web application that will allow us to help us to solve any business specific needs, right? So whatever we have developed so far, right, this is based on a prime react framework, and this is an open source and available to anybody, and it's easy to learn and develop web application very easily. So there is a very good documentation that's available, and there are a lot of examples in their documentation, and we followed that when we initially started this, right? And this web application that we have developed is mainly for the to perform some health checks that a DBA can be done, can do it on their own, and that will provide like valuable insights, best practices, and it also recommends the good things or any suggestions that needed to do on their datacom environment, right? So far this process is done like lot of manual work, and our Broadcom SMEs used to do it based on the request for each customer. So this manual, they have to go through a big CXX report and come up with this analysis, right? But now we automated it now, right? So using this application, and this is the best use case, and we don't need to spend hours and hours for each customer doing the same thing again and again for every 3 months to make sure their datacom environment is good and its performance is better, like that, right? So and everything, all this is possible only mainly because we have that REST APIs available, and easily we were using through this web application. So that's what I want to say, that REST APIs are very powerful and easy to use in any of these newly web applications, or any Java, or any kind of UI, right? So and one more good part of this is whatever we are developed so far, right? We want to give this as an open source offering to all our customers, and this will serve as an quick start to start adopting these REST APIs, right? So you can download the code, make any changes you want, and customize it for your any of your to solve any of your business use cases. Yeah. So let me start the application, show you. So this again, as Dave mentioned, this is the health check, sample health check that I was talking about. And so let me start the application. Let me show you. So we do yarn start here, which will automatically start this in a Chrome window, right? So here, if you can see, this is the, again, this is a simple one. And whenever we select the any of this uh, muff or the data source, right, at the back end it's going, and at the back end it connected to our REST API server, got all the data that is required, whatever we defined in the endpoint. So I will show you the code, how easily we can integrate this web application with the REST API. But so so once we get the data, right, it's easy to put whatever the component we want. Here we are using the data table that's provided by Prime React, and we can do a lot of things by default. It's very easy, like, see, we can do filtering, all that stuff very easily, and we can provide a lot of tabs, and it was very easy for us to develop this, right? And a web application or a web developer can easily get this, right? So I'll just go spend like a couple of minutes on what's there in this, like the, so we have, in whatever the rules that we were doing manually, we have a lot of these rules here that we have put here with a lot of documentation and all, right? And we can select, deselect them, and how many rules we have selected here, right? Once we go to this analyze, these are all the rules that we have defined, and we will provide an option for them to add more rules or do whatever. And again, everything is on this data table, uh, and we can do filtering, sorting, all that stuff, right? So the main thing is this. So whenever we click this generate report at the back end, all the rules that we have selected will be applied on the data that we downloaded from the REST API, using the REST API from the database, right? So what we did so far is we downloaded the data using the REST API. Once the data is in this web application, there is some there are a lot of these things that we applied a lot of business rules here to solve this purpose, right? And they can, so these are some major issues that they need to fix, right? In the environment there are some minor ones, and and there are some technical info that they can look, right? They may not need to do anything, but this is just the technical information. And there is one more option to compare, right? So this is the current report, for example, and if they have any report that in the past they did, right, and they have improved, so they can compare between whatever we have old and new, and they can see only the differences, right? I don't have a right example, but this is one more thing that we have provided. So this is mainly from the business uh, perspective, but but the main point here is that once we have data, whatever we can do on UI, that's easily we can develop, right? So next thing is, let me show you where the code and all, right? So 1 minute. So here, this is how generally a prime React frame project looks like. It will have a package.json where we define what is the REST API server that we need to go against, right? And there will be an app.tsx. So this is the main driver of this, where there is a where we have this main menu that we have shown earlier, right? Like doing all the compare, analyze, all this stuff, and whenever we click this, the operation has to be done. And for example, so this is the location, this is the so we define the REST API server here. We wrote a small code here, which is using Axios, right? And we define which URL that we need to go against, like this is the URL that we are building, whether it is system or whatever we select there, and that's it. So and this one line of code will get the data from database using the REST API into this object, and once we get the object, whatever we want to do, we can do, right? So this is simple. This is the actual code that is going and connecting the REST API and getting it. So only few lines of code, right? Rest of them, whatever we saw, everything, all this code is mainly how to use the data. So that's a different way and depends upon what's the use case that we have, right? So yeah, and there is one more command. So here, if you see, right, so these are all the defined packages that we are using, right? Dependency packages that are needed for this app to work. And whenever we run a command, like so we did earlier, like yarn start, right? When you do yarn install, so it will download all the packages and it will put them in this node modules folder first time. And whenever we run again, it keeps updating, right? uh, and finally, I would like to show, so this is the location where we have this prime React documentation, and we have examples. This is the code and this is how it looks like, right? And it's simple. And I mean, finally, this is the Swagger view of the endpoints that we show. So this is where we went against. So earlier Dave was also showing the same thing. So these are the 3 endpoints that are available for the web application, and we downloaded it. I think yeah, I mean, as mentioned earlier, once we have this REST API setup that's available, right, it's easy to write these web applications to retrieve data and solve any of our business use cases. Yeah. I think that's all I have today. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vamsi. Glenn, how do I get control back?
I got it
Okay.
for you. There you go.
Okay. All right. So I think I talked way too long, so I had a few extra slides that I'm going to skip over and get to the. We had, as I mentioned, we have a couple polls. So kind of the first poll here is really, based upon what you've seen, how does this resonate with what you're thinking about in terms of, really, do you have any modernization projects? And so kind of got 3 choices. Yeah, contact me. Keep me posted. Or nah, don't bother. So those are kind of the three questions that Sheila had formulated for the poll. So
Thanks,
you
Dave.
can
I've
answer
launched the
them.
poll. It looks like it's being distributed still. Once people start
Okay,
voting, we'll leave it open long enough for everyone to vote who wants to.
sure. Okay.
Voting has started, so we'll. All right, looks like people are still voting, so let's wait another 10 seconds or so.
Okay.
All right, thanks everybody. Dave, your presentation is visible again.
Okay. All right. So okay. just some other, come on, there we go. Okay, so here, Sheila had a few announcements and other things that sort of a little broader scope here. So we'll talk about those as well. One of the initiatives that Broadcom in general is trying to help customers with things that are beyond code. And so, things about building a new generation of mainframers, the Vitality program, no cost online, education, design thinking workshops and embrace open workshops, and then some additional things like MRI assumptions. And this is sort of overall Broadcom. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I have a bunch more to get through. So, but the key point here is that Sheila wanted to describe was we call embrace open workshops. And these are really workshops to help customers to kind of onboard technology like the stuff we just showed you. So we're willing to help if you're interested. If you responded yes, or maybe in the previous poll, we're willing to work with you hands-on to help you adopt those. So if you're interested in that, please contact Sheila. And okay, okay, so I guess there's a replay available for the Beyond Code offering. I think you can get that probably from communities. So another poll, and that would be: are you willing to participate in an API Embrace Open workshop? Sort of the kind of some of the types of things we just saw.
Thanks, Dave. Once again, I am distributing the poll now. It takes a few seconds to get out there, and then we'll keep it open long enough for folks to vote. All right, people are voting. Let's say another 15 seconds or so. All right, thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, so if you answered yes to that question, just please contact Sheila directly. She'd love to hear from you. And okay, so yes, please. I didn't realize that. Okay, this is actually another poll. If you can actually say contact me directly right now if you're interested. So.
Yeah, Dave, those are actually the answers to the last poll, so you can keep going.
Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't.
No, you're all good.
I focused on the technical, spent too much time talking about Zoe at the beginning, but anyway. Okay, and kind of pretty much close to last but not least, or last slide we have here is the mainframe technical exchanges that, the in-person events are back. There's one in Europe, in Prague, the in-person event on April 18th or 20th. And we're also working on an in-person event in Plano, Texas in June that we will have IDMS and Datacom. I think we're not going to call it, the first day will be, I think we're not actually going to end up calling it pre-conference education, but it'll be specialized, more in-depth sessions for IDMS and Datacom the first day of it. And then the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of that week will be the, sort of the general sessions, and we'll have a track for IDMS and a track for Datacom. And I think we'll have, pretty much a session every, all the available sessions will fill up. So it's a great opportunity to network with your peers and Broadcom experts to get some technical education. And there's no registration fee. It's open to all Broadcom customers. All you have to pay for is your hotel and travel. So a plug for that. And I don't know if registration is opened yet for that, but it will be shortly. So be on the lookout for that.
It's not open yet.
It's
Yeah,
not.
it's not open yet. No, but
Okay.
but it will be very soon, as you said.
Right. And if you don't hear from it soon, then you reach out to Len or Sheila or any of us, and that would be great. So with that, we went a little longer than I think we thought of. But were there any questions, Len, or anybody want to ask a question now?
No questions came in, but folks, if you do have questions, feel free to put them right in the questions box now. If you have something a little more longer, a little more involved, please feel free to just type wait and hit enter so we don't close the session while you're still typing. There's also the opportunity to ask a question in the post-event survey that will pop up at the end of the session. All right, I don't see anything coming in, so let's go ahead and wrap up. Dave and Ramji, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, and everyone who joined us, we also appreciate your time. We know there's a lot of virtual events still going on. We appreciate you coming to one of ours. Have a great day and rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.